Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussions, news, and interviews, presenting The Film Scene with Illeana Douglas. Illeana is an actress, writer, author, and film historian with a need to discuss movies that borders on obsession. You'll learn the history of movies one great story at a time. The Film Scene is the deep cuts of movie podcasts, featuring movies we love by the people who made them. And now, Illeana Douglas.
Hello, everyone.
Here
Sorry,
we are.
I was sipping my tea. I've taken too much time off.
It's all right. We're in it.
Welcome to the Film Scene. Hello, Jeff. Nice to see you.
Illeana Douglas, it's so nice to see you too. You're just coming off of a shoot that I know you're going to mention.
Yes, we are.
But it's a shoot that you're co-starring in with our guest today, of whom I'm a huge fan. It is so exciting.
I know. The great John Cameron Mitchell.
Absolutely.
And who I've been such a fan of. He's looking at me right now.
He's in the room right here.
I dressed up special for him, too. But I think everyone, has seen Hedwig and the Angry Inch. It's such a life-changing film and experience and show. And
it is the project that seems to have a million lives, right? I mean, it has been a vital project for going on 2 decades now, which surprised me because I feel like it was yesterday that I watched the movie.
Well, that's one of the things we're going to be talking about, just again in reading up, the idea that it's not just, it's about drag, that it's about finding yourself and embracing who you are and your flaws and all, and all of that and how important that is.
Yeah, I love sort of that like Sundance character-driven indie. It's still my favorite, if you can call that a genre, I don't know.
Plus it's a musical.
And it's a musical, but really important film for me just in discovering that I didn't only need to be seeing studio movies. I could be watching just well-written, almost play-like meditations on character, and that's kind of what's defined my taste in film, since it's a really important movie for me personally. So super excited to have John on the show.
So we're going to get to all of that and what I was doing for the last few weeks. But I wanted to mention, often does social media, I just write about movies and talk about movies and things like that. I had Carol Lindley, the wonderful actress from, films like The Poseidon Adventure, Blue Denim, Bunny Lake is Missing, which I, particularly love. Also, Under the Yum Yum Tree with Jack Lemmon, The Pleasure Seekers, which is a very weird movie, another Otto Preminger film. It's very interesting. But she passed away, and I had an experience many years ago, in 1998. I was doing a movie, which was not a great movie. I don't know why I was in it. But, I remember my agent said, it's a lot of money. So
That'll do it.
That'll do it. But it was one of those movies that it's so bad that years later, I was doing a movie with Lucy Liu, and I said, oh, hi, we were actually in a movie many years ago. And she looked at me and said, no, we weren't. And I said, I didn't get it. And I said, no, actually we were. It was called Flypaper. She just looked at me and I was like, okay, don't mention bad movies.
The question is, is it such a powerfully negative experience that it's actually been erased from her mind, or does she just deny that it
Well,
ever
here's
happened?
the thing, Jeff. I've never seen the film. So maybe she's not in it. I don't know. Maybe she was cut from it or something. Anyway, it's, because people always say to me, I have this 6 degrees quality. This is how I met Dane Cook. He was in the film.
Of course.
I acted with Dane Cook. Robert Loggia was in the film. That was kind of fun and neat. And I was working opposite an actor named John C. McGinley, who it turns out is completely out of his mind. I'd seen, you see people. I saw John in a show, Off-Broadway show, Circle in the Square, and wonderful actor. And we met afterwards, and he was so nice and normal. And then you go get cast in a film with him, and he was off his rocker. And we were doing a scene. Anyway, he chased me through Runyon Canyon. God only knows why. That was the scene. And then we had to roll down a hill, which they assured me would be safe, which, of course, it wasn't. But somehow we got into a house. And we were shooting, the day comes, we're shooting the scene that's in the house. And Carol Lindley is standing in this room, and it turns out she's going to be the person who owns the house cutting vegetables while John C. McGinley and I have a discussion. Wow. She was not part of the scene in any way, shape, or form. She was just sitting quietly off to the side. It was astonishing to me. Nobody knew who she was. And, it really broke my heart. She was referred to as, the day player.
Wow.
Didn't have a name or anything like that. And so as soon as we took a break, I went outside and I said, it's an honor to meet you and talk to you. I just talked about Bunny Lake is missing. And, she was very humble and very sweet. And she said that the only reason she was doing the movie was because she needed to make her insurance quota. And it just broke my heart. And I said, what about your family? Do you have family or anything like that? And it's so challenging. You think of these people, these luminous, these movie stars.
Treasures of cinema.
And, we don't sort of properly take care of people or acknowledge how hard it is to get, insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And to qualify even for insurance is, you have to make, I think it's about $30,000 a year in Screen Actors Guild. So she was trying to make her insurance. And we spoke a bit. And she was also telling me about she had this opportunity to do an autograph show, which she was horrified about. She didn't want to do it, and she was really embarrassed. And so I said, no, I know a lot of people that do them. And I mentioned that I did a movie with Asner, and I said it can actually be really fun, and you run into people. And so I felt like I made her feel better.
I'm sure you did.
About that, because I always... I've had so many experiences in my life going back to that, when I met many, many years ago, Rudy Valley, working in this broken down dinner theater, slapping on his makeup. And that's showbiz, is that, artists have this, they have this need to perform. And it's so vital and so important, and they do it. I don't think they do it for money, and we don't think about the future. And one day you wake up and you're older and you've got all these movies behind you and all these credentials, and the nobody really cares about you anymore. And I find that so profoundly sad. But it was an incredible experience I had with her. I sat with her all day. I did my best to try to make her, I haven't seen the movie, but most of the movie, I just looked at her in the scene. I just decided I was going to incorporate her in the scene as much as possible. And
it's very generous.
Not look at John C. McGinley, so it had a kind of a twofer. But anyway, it was just a profoundly sad experience I had, and I thought about it, and I wanted to share it, and so many people reacted. Including friends like Dana Delaney, and talking about this dilemma of insurance. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And
I'm glad you did. It's such an important part of recognizing some of the hypocrisies of this business. And just as a quick recommendation, if any of you guys haven't seen the FX miniseries that Ryan Murphy did, Feud, about Betty and Joan, the last couple episodes of that miniseries really highlighted that issue, where, Betty Davis actually took out an ad in Variety looking for work.
Right.
And Joan Crawford, it's one of the most heartbreaking sequences I've seen on a TV show, but they show her as she starts to take these exploitive B movies. She's getting yelled at by these young directors who have no idea how she is, how much of a legend that she is. And, the fact that art is at least acknowledging that component of the business now, I think is important, that we're shining a spotlight on that hypocrisy. But it is, if you want to be moved by a heartbreaking sort of representation of what you're talking about, that is a really well-made miniseries on FX with Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon. Really good.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I wanted to single that out. And also, Bunny Lake is Missing is one of my favorite films. So if people want to see that, that's one of, I think, one of her best, performances. And I love Otto Preminger. All right, well, let's get to John Cameron Mitchell, because he's going to have a lot to say about this. This bio goes, this is our edited bio. Began his New York stage appearances, including Broadway's Big River, Secret Garden, 6 Degrees of Separation, Larry Kramer's Destiny of Me, for which he won the Obie Award. And then here we go, starred in, wrote the book for the original 1998 Off-Broadway production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch, for Itch and the Itch. The Itch. That was the original title. In 2001, John directed, wrote, starred in the film adaptation of the musical, which won him Best Director at Sundance and the Golden Globe for Best Actor. And I'm going to go on and on. You directed Rabbit Hole, my goodness, How to Talk to Girls at Parties, and on screen you were in Vinyl, Mozart in the Jungle, and you're currently starring in the Hulu comedy Shrill, starring A.D. Bryant. Ladies and gentlemen, John Cameron Mitchell. And I was editing as I went on.
It's just the things that we've done, some of which we're proud of.
No, I know.
And we always had a lot of mutual friends, but never really hung out. So
I know, we
fun.
just saw each other socially, but the minute I saw you in the makeup trailer, I just instantly... You came in with that... I'm very aware of everything, and as soon as you came in the makeup trailer, there was a certain... I just sensed that you were fun.
It's true. It's true. I'm also the oldest cast member, so there's a kind of like interesting thing that happens, where there's a lot of comedians, who came up through comedy.
Iced hot milk.
Oh, great.
Oh, for you. Delivery on the air. I love it.
And, I did, you talked about Carol Lindley, and
God.
I really only thought about doing a series. I did a series in the 90s called Party Girl, but I didn't want to be tied down, and sometimes the shows aren't great. You don't know it right away. But my mom has Alzheimer's and needs a lot of care, so I've kind of gone back, I'm like, get me that job, I'm on tour with a concert tour called The Origin of Love that's going around. It'll be in LA in April. And then I said, as my friend Stephen said, John, just tell your agent to get you the coroner role where you make a snarky remark with the brain in your hand. You drop the brain and then say, hey, you want to go out for dinner? And then cash the check. I'm like, that's all I want. Mm-hmm. And I lucked out in a wonderful show that I didn't have to audition for, Shrill, with the wonderful A.D. Bryant.
Yes, which you're so terrific on that show.
So are you.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but
she will be terrific on that.
But it was really fun to do, and all these series are like little independent films now. Anyway, I think.
Yeah, I mean television. I mean we are film people and theater people, and there was a magic time in the 90s and 2000s where a lot of challenging films were being financed. There was a lot of company financing. There was a lot of people watching. Mm-hmm. People didn't feel the need for a star. They would go see the best reviewed film of the week, Right. They just read and said, what's, the South African comedy, or this, Chinese, whatever. And that's how it went. Of course, as the economic situation happened in the 2000s, as the internet came in, as streaming came in, people stopped running to see those small films. Mm-hmm. I mean, the form is still beloved, and when as young people, when I bring them to an amazing film with an audience, their minds are blown.
Right.
But they are also watching the. Someone said the other day, "Yeah, I watched Hedwig on." He was like an 18-year-old on my phone, and it was. I just liked it so much better when we showed it at the Cinema 21 in Portland with the screaming crowd. And I'm like, yeah, that would sort of. Yeah, it's like it was so good.
I usually always ask people with the first, movie. I know you traveled around a lot when you were a kid. You were an Army brat, and do you remember the first film you saw? Who took you to see it? Were you in America or
I was in
Europe?
Europe a lot. My mom's British. My dad was in the Army, so we lived in Germany and Scotland a lot. And we actually got like TV, Lash LaRue serials. Like the military theaters had some stuff in cans lying around. So for the children's matinees, they would play these 40s and 50s, kind of serials. Mm-hmm. You'd get 10 minutes of a show, and then it was so fun because you were
anything that was a movie seemed fun.
Yeah, you were out of time. In the military, we didn't always get the newest things, but they had an old I remember my first date with a girl was with, seeing Lead Belly. Remember that movie from the 70s?
Yes.
And it went terribly because she dropped something and I ended up sitting on her head because she leaned over, and that was the end of my heterosexual adventure. And then there was a boarding school in Scotland where the monks, later I realized many social misfits, but at the time they would it was the early 70s, and pretty much every Hollywood movie had tits in it. Remember, it was just de rigueur, and they would show these crazy films. And I remember, sometimes they'd be the Carry On films, which are ridiculous
British
sex comedies that always had tits and gay men playing straight men. And then there was also, I remember seeing Madame Sin, which I believe was a late Bette Davis desperate movie. And also they all had tits, but they also had they had ambiguous endings. The hero would often die, and there was that weird post Easy Rider Vietnam era where the popular films were deeper and less crowd pleasing and a bit there was paranoia, and everything was changing.
Yeah.
And the films that were the best films of that decade in the U.S. were often very popular. Nowadays, actually the best films of the year aren't necessarily ones that make money. But there was this weird moment, as you know, the new Hollywood, where the studios didn't know what to do, so they gave the keys to the car to the freaks.
Yeah.
And for about 5 or 6 years, anything could happen.
I know. I love that period. Not all of it is successful. I mean, you end up with
We remember, we get the best ones that last.
Yeah.
The networks and the Nashvilles.
Yes. But sometimes, but even movies like Head.
Yeah, that was when I saw in the military theater. And we were kids, and it's like, Head. It's like, get Head. And it's just the monkeys going anti-Vietnam.
Crazy.
And so cool. But that's, where we both came from, where weird was not a pejorative. Weird was what you went for.
Were you looking for, because I remember I would look for someone in the movie that I identified with. Like, I identified with Liza Minnelli in Cabaret. That I remember that being one of my first crucial connections. I wanted to be her. I wanted the green. Yeah. And you don't know why.
Even the kids' movies had a kind of realism and darkness. I remember there was not a great film, but it was, a classic kind of 70s kids, which Bless the Beasts and the Children, which had a Karen Carpenter, song. And it was the weirdos at the summer camp decide to run away together to save the buffalo who are being shot in a hunting corral, rich people shooting, game in a corral. And they become, it's very violent, and they become kind of like the buffalo being killed. So, and there was a gay character, which was a big deal, in 74.
Right.
But at that time, even socially, it was, there was a hip thing about bisexuality, and it was filtering into films like Sunday Bloody Sunday and certainly Rocky Horror. But it was a strange, it kind of faded as the 70s went on and Reagan came in. And then the only queer people you saw were dying of AIDS or were serial killers, in the 80s. And then the new queer cinema, which really informed my aesthetic in terms of the way things were made. This was Gus Van Sant, Todd Haynes, Tom Kalin, Jenny Livingston.
Did you ever see the movie Parting Glances?
Yes.
Really early on?
Yeah. Steve Buscemi is probably the first AIDS patient I saw as a character. My Beautiful Laundrette, Daniel Day-Lewis, and early Almodovar. So all of those things, kind of, as well as John Waters and Rocky Horror and David Bowie, all funneled into Hedwig, which started out as a kind of a club act and then a theater piece Off-Broadway. And we had this weird moment. We came out in 98, and it was like a bidding war for Hedwig, unheard of. The film would not be made now at that budget starring me.
That's
sadly.
interesting to think of.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to that, the moment before that, where you say where you're doing theater, and I mean, you're relatively successful of doing Broadway shows, but what was it deep inside you that said, I want to do something different? Or
I had a great education at Northwestern, and there were teachers like Frank Galati who were performance art people. So they were like, any text can be dramatic. Take the phone book, put it on stage, put it in a context, it's a play. So nothing felt out of bounds. And experimentation was important. Plus, Steppenwolf was ascendant when I was in Chicago. Right. So it was like rock and roll, theater rock and roll.
Right.
I remember seeing A Tooth of Crime with, Gary Cole, that was very influential then. And so from the beginning, and I had older classmates who were successful, like Bruce Norris and Dennis O'Hare and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and these were all people who were, seniors when I was a freshman, and they were doing it their way, And I remember, Bruce Norris quitting a TV show, and I was like, "Can you do that?" And he did it again later, and then won the Pulitzer, And I was like, "No, you have to, there has to be some no to things that feel wrong, if only to feel good about what you're doing." Usually we're told do whatever, right?
Right.
You can always learn, and you can learn from any job, but then you have to saying no for your dignity. Because you got to pay the bills, but there's other things that are wrong. So weirdly, a very formative moment was when I lived in LA in the 80s, and I auditioned for a New Line film directed by Bob Shea, who was the head of New Line, and he was directing a feature. And it was kind of a 50s teen, gang and, kind of a teen comedy. And he was really sweet. And I came in, I hadn't read my sides. And then as I was there, right before I went in, it was completely homophobically written, the character. So it was like every stereotype, it was pedophile jokes. It was just like and not even consistent stereotypes. There were like too many of them. It was like ridiculous. And he said, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Well, it's pretty homophobic." And he's like, "Is it?" And I, it was 88, so people weren't thinking about that.
Right.
It was, as it was, stereotypes were galore. And there hadn't really been queer actors or someone, stopping or calling attention to this. So I said, yeah, because this is there's an S&M joke and there's a pedophile joke, and it's like all of these collection of, kind of negative. It's like, oh, well, how would you do it if the character was straight? And I was like, well, the lines are not really appropriate for that. But I did it, and I didn't yell. It was the AIDS crisis, so I was out in Hollywood, which was not normal, was not usual. But it felt really cowardly at that time to be in the closet. And I would wear my silence equals death pin to auditions or whatever.
Yeah.
And if they had a problem, they had a problem. But he was really cool, and he rewrote it to be straight. Because it wasn't the kind of movie yet where you could have a complex queer character in the 50s without it being a different movie. So I did it, and he was sweet to me. And then over the years, he'd see me in plays, 6 Degrees of Separation, and then Hedwig, and he felt very fatherly, and he said, "I want to help you make this film. I want you to star in it, direct in it, direct it, and I want to fully finance it." This weirdo Hedwig, punk rock musical, and he did. He, Mike DeLuca, Amy Henkels, and Mark Tusk, who worked with...
yes, I remember Mark.
Yeah, worked with Weinstein's and escaped that. But I was allowed to make, in effect, have a final cut for my first film. I had never made a short. And that can't happen now.
Right.
The things that converged were 1 or 2 people in charge of a studio, which doesn't much happen anymore. Even since Harvey.
With a certain budget.
Yeah.
A kind of $5 million.
Yeah, $6 million budget. That doesn't even happen. It has to go through a lot of layers. It has to have stars. It has to have such and such. So there was a strange moment in time where New Line artists and various people really wanted to make, like Forrest Whitaker was like, "I really want to direct this," and Tim Burton, and I said, I'd like to direct it. And I think Forrest said, that would be a terrible mistake. I was like, what? I haven't, how would you?
Thank God. So in the creation of Hedwig, how did you develop your look? Because again, very much, like a clown looks in the mirror and says, what is my, what is my character? Who am I? How did you go about, what was the first time you looked in a mirror and,
well, the first,
must be a very...
It's a very powerful thing. Drag, I think everyone should try drag, their version of drag, because it also includes writing.
I would think the worst thing that would happen is like what Dustin Hoffman says, is that he looked in the mirror and said he wasn't pretty, and he got really upset. I think more is not made of that because, again, this pressure.
Yeah. I mean, drag was about empowering yourself. It was about armoring yourself. If you're a little femboy, you had strength, and people instantly were scared and attracted. It kind of desexualized for a while, which was a weird thing that because of gay men's internal femphobia, they wouldn't almost think of drag queens as sexy, though straight guys could. So there was an interesting... Gender and sexuality are two different things that sometimes connect. And in this case, I was doing drag and having a memory of a babysitter who took care of my brother, who's a German army wife named Helga, who was the visual, she was Marlene Dietrich in a tube top.
Yeah.
And she had red, and so I was looking, it was kind of like the hair, 70s, That was based on my childhood friend Stacy Orr, which I thought was a great name because it always seemed like the beginning of a sentence. Stacy Orr. And I used to collect drag names. Hell of a Bottom Carter, Natalie Wooden.
Oh, I like that one.
Lowest common denominator. But Hedwig was not a joke character. It was a person who, in a way, was forced into a gender reassignment against his will.
Yes.
Not really a trans or a drag fairy tale. It's actually a story of mutilation, perhaps by the patriarchy, if you want to look at it that way. You have to be this or that.
Right.
The binarchy. I think of it as the binarchy. If you're a man, you're this. If you're a woman, you're that.
Right.
And I applaud the non-binary movement, which is like, no, I'm actually a gender of one here, and I don't feel the need to conform. But I'm not, that's an interesting thing. If I was a kid coming up, I probably would identify as non-binary trans. Now I can't be, now I just want a good bowel movement. So when we did the face, I was thinking of, things that were important, and they, the shape of the eye. I had a great makeup and hair designer, Mike Potter, who I met in Kim's video store as a clerk. He was a surly video clerk. What do you mean you haven't seen that? I'm not going to rent that to you if you haven't seen it. What? And we became friends, and he started, creating Hedwig. We had toilet paper rolls to create the rolls in the hair, which sometimes would fall out. And we always did the blush with a card to get a hard line.
Yes. Reminded me of Vogue. Those pictures of Vogue models.
Very 80s. Yeah. And we always used like a subscription. Those things that fall out of a New Yorker. We always had the very classy subscription one, like Icon magazine. And so, and then we had it up here too, so it looked like a car.
Yes.
Skidded on my face. And there was all these key things, a drop, we had a lot of glitter, a drop of silver glitter on the red, which we called the cum drop. And so I am a perfectionist, but in the fun way, and you're like, I had acid wash jeans, but I didn't quite get the right tint. So I would, moisten it with tea bags to get that yellowy acid wash. And the amount of time I spent was, it was like making a model airplane. It was like creating this character. And we never knew where it was going, but it was so thrilling coming out of TV and Broadway, which were such machines, back to punk rock and drag. And I was watching these drag queens and trans performers who were just so powerful and dangerous. And the feeling I got in a punk rock show, I was wondering why I didn't feel that in a musical sometimes. But then the punk rock didn't always have a good narrative to get the emotion. So it's like, let's Stephen Trask, the composer, and I, let's jam all of these influences together. Stand-ups, Broadway, punk rock, drag. We can't have a show that has them all. And we just thought about Off-Broadway, but so the film wasn't really in our sights, but then suddenly we had an opportunity to see all the things that I only describe in the play, with a lot of people behind us. And I had super experienced collaborators because I knew nothing. The Merchant Ivory editor, Andrew Marcus, Ariane Phillips, Oscar-nominated costume designer, who just did the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Therese Dupre, who just passed away, who worked with Spike Lee and Todd Haynes a lot, who was a brilliant production designer. So it was girding myself, someone who knew very little except what I liked. And the Sundance Lab was a real indispensable moment as a filmmaker to try some scenes out. Michelle Satter, the great unsung hero of independent film who runs the labs, said, why don't you have someone direct you in a scene and then you direct yourself in the same scene and see how it feels. Because I wasn't sure if I wanted to co-direct her.
Right.
So Tom directed me in one scene and then I directed myself, and I was bored when I was just the actor.
Right.
So I realized I could do it. And Michelle was very instrumental with that. And I found my DP there, Frank DeMarco, who she assigned to me, not super experienced, but very good DP who I've now worked with on all my films.
That you're in sync.
Yeah.
So when you are, how are you directing in heels? I mean, how do you?
Yeah,
how do
I'm
you
like, move those trucks with that wig on.
Right. The hardest thing as an actor is to have the vulnerability in front of the character, and the director is complete opposite. You must be in control. And
I couldn't have done it if I hadn't been doing the role for a year on stage.
Right.
So I could slip into it very easily.
But you're telling I always find the visual, maybe I'm overthinking it, but that visual of you're trying to tell something very seriously, and you've got to...
In your head, you're editing. Well, that was less of a big deal. I mean, we were also in Canada, which was, more receptive to drag than the U.S. at the time. They're practically British, where drag is, is tradition.
Oh, that's true.
So we even had a drag day, and the Teamsters were in drag.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Only in Canada. Maybe now, but then...
Is there anybody who enjoyed it a little bit too much?
Actually, yes.
Yes, that's always what happens.
Yeah.
I was in theater school, and it's always like, okay, it's a day.
Yeah.
The boys get to put on makeup.
The makeup,
You're unlocking that closet door is, I think, what's happening.
Well, there's always a few people that it's like, you're enjoying this a little bit
yes,
too much.
but they're enjoying it enough.
I know, it's wonderful.
And there is, interestingly, working in Portland, which is, the land of dreams, there's so many more, just in the last year, I noticed so many more guys kind of dressing, androgynously in their non-binary way, and mostly straight guys. I could tell by their style.
Do they know why they are?
I think they're just allowed to.
Or is it just fashion?
I don't think it's fashion, because it's more that kind of hippie-ish. It's not like they're trying to dress to impress. They're just more comfortable. I can tell they're straight guys because they're still wearing Tevas and bad sandals. but there is a freedom, and I was like, oh, this feels great. I'm wearing
a kilt.
A kilt skirt from Portland right now, and got my nails done, and it's like, this is what I always wanted to do. But as a male actor, for sure, and female actors too, you had to do certain things. You couldn't get crazy with your hair. You couldn't be to anything in case someone said, oh, well, he's that. He couldn't possibly do this.
Of course. And that's what we were faced with in the late 80s and 90s as an actor, which was, kind of a tough period.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one of the songs, which is one of my favorite songs, which I was humming at the top. Put on makeup. I love, because it's I feel like it's such an anthem song for everybody.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of other kind of anthem songs. Believe it or not, one of them even is 9 to 5. Is like, working 9 to 5.
Let's get this together.
Because it's like, it's
Punch the clock.
Yeah, it's how we all, put on our armor and go out and face the day. And it's just one of my favorite staged scenes. You look like you're having a really great time.
It wasn't torture. I mean, doing that, directing, writing, acting, and the drag was torture. Luckily, I had great people around me, but it was like not, it was the hardest thing I'll ever do. I don't think I took a shit for 2 weeks. It was like the body, luckily I was still young. It was like it was more than you would ever ask anyone to do. And our crews were used to, Lifetime movies, so they were like, what the hell? And, we're just so rock and roll that, I'm like, to the best boy grip, I'm like, can I just use your ass to shoot that close up while I direct this over here? And he's like, yeah. Everything was just, what everyone was mucking in, and the editor was shooting B-roll, and, sometimes we had 3 little sets going, with some inserts, and
yeah.
And the last day was a 20-hour day in a studio, and we had like 6 different sets in a giant room, including, in Hedwig, where the trailer opens up when they're making out.
Yeah.
And we also did a fake driving scene in the limo, with someone pushing the car.
Yes.
And then the scene where it's Love the Front of Me, we had the trailer in there. And
you did that all on the last?
Well, we fixed certain, we had missed some stuff.
Yeah.
And then like bits of the Berlin Wall, with Gummi Bear. It was just, but it felt like we were doing, let's all put on a show in the way that we did the play. It had the same vibe. And there was no interference from anybody. And it was, it was that special Canada time where everything is made in Canada because it was cheaper. And it was a weird miracle, but I also knew it would never be that hard. And doing Wig in a Box was particularly hard because we were storyboarding as we went. Other scenes I had a good year to think about, so I'd storyboard a lot and work with the set designer and DP before they were on the clock. So I always recommend people doing their first thing is to find the DP, the designers, the casting director that are hungry enough to work before the clock starts. You know, a lot of DPs, they understandably, can get a little taken advantage of by their first-time directors and feel like they're doing months of work without getting paid. But if it's something like this that you really is special, I mean, we all do that anyway for things we love. So find the DP who cares about it enough to teach you before you go on the clock. Because once you're in prep, it's a train that won't stop and you can go crazy.
And what did Bob Shea say when he saw the final movie? He must have been blown away.
Well, I showed him in Magno screening room or something in New York. I was very scared. It was the director's cut. He didn't see anything else. And it was just him and me in the back, And, when it's a comedy, people, it's one person. It's not going to always, they're not going to feel comfortable. And then there was one line halfway through where Hedwig's lover says, "Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" And I say, "No, but I love his work." And he burst out laughing. Thank God he was a Jew. And I was like, oh, he's really in it. And then afterwards he had tears in his eyes.
Aww.
And he was like, "I'm so proud of you," And he really made my career, by allowing me to do that, and has always been just very kind to me. And
the last thing I was going to ask you about this, and then I'll move it on, is the amount of humor that's in it, and also the right amount of humor and the right amount of pathos. Yeah, it never gets to the point where, which I think
compromising one or the other, maybe.
Exactly, it's that fine line.
Which is the films that we talked about liking.
You have to trust
Hal Ashby.
that it's. You trust from the very beginning that you as a person, your quality is very empathetic. So you don't need to have it.
Overdo it.
Which I feel sometimes people get nervous about.
Yeah, more acting is better.
I'm with
acting.
Hedwig from the very beginning of the movie, from the instant, and I don't know why that is, and why some movies work.
She's cruel too. She's been, mutilated and abused, and then she is very cruel to her band and backup singer, but in some ways it's also a bit of a gypsy story, the woman who was not appreciated in her mind, and it's a very traditional kind of story. There's little tears of Petra von Kant with her and her backup singer / wife, husband, and but the tone really came from those films that I love, by Hal Ashby, like Harold and Maude and Being There, and Shampoo, which teetered on. They were comedies on the surface, but that wasn't the core. The core was very emotionally there. There was always ideas, metaphors flying through the air, and then people like Altman, who also teetered on that, beautiful. There was always humor, but super realistic, and Nashville and Three Women and those films informed it greatly. I remember seeing Nashville for the first time in college, that at the Varsity, Movie Palace in Evanston, and just blew me away. And the fact that 3 hours and you're just taken away. I think that and maybe Network were the ones that really showed me. And then later, A Woman Under the Influence were the ones that said, okay, cinema is a place that you can be free, theoretically. You can experiment, but you can also toy with tone to find truth. And my way often uses music and humor to get to it. The sugar that makes the medicine go down. But these people also trusted their actors. Other directors, Bresson, even Kubrick, you feel like the actors are kind of like secondary.
Right.
Even if they're brilliant.
Yes.
Anyone who worked with Kubrick felt a little bit like a pawn.
Right.
With the thousands of takes. And he always had the best. And you appreciated him because he could make amazing films. Dr. Strangelove, rocks me. And the tone is so precise, in that and Lolita, this sort of comic satirical tone, that coming to filmmaking later in life in my 30s, I think is kind of a boon, because by then you really know what you like. When you're 21, you just know that you need to make it and be seen and appreciated. But you don't, and some things blew you away, but things that blow you away at 16, you're lucky if same film's going to blow you away at 35. We were lucky because we grew up with films that actually were amazing and popular. I mean, you can look at Dog Day Afternoon, any Sidney Lumet film, which were very commercial,
right,
and see this, and they were great then as kids, and they're great now, and they're, whereas most people who came up in the 80s and beyond, the films they loved most, they don't measure up. The memories measure up, but not as great films usually.
Yeah, I agree. So then after the film, by the way, there's an ongoing joke with Rent. Was there an issue with?
Oh no, it's just
that funny ongoing. I love it.
I was actually asked to play the Puerto Rican drag queen in the original production, and I was like, guys,
I knew that.
This was before,
Yes.
before people thought about these things, but I was like, do I have anything Puerto Rican about me? But they were cool, they're nice. Yeah. So we came up at the same time, and they were the more popular things. So I just love the idea of a character that is a man played by a woman who wants to dress as a woman.
Yes, I love the little running gag. So,
one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Hedwig question, that's okay.
Yeah.
You were talking about the fact that, late 80s, early 90s, every queer character was either tragic or psychopathic.
Yeah.
Do you feel like part of the birth of Hedwig was just the desire to create an interesting queer character?
Yeah, well, oddly enough, the original story was more about Tommy, the boyfriend who was the son of the general and who went on to become a rock star. And I was the son of the general, and Helga / Hedwig was, our babysitter. So there were these various, we use the metaphor of the origin of love from Plato's Symposium of we're all cut in half by the gods and we seek our other half again. And so originally it was Tommy's character seeking his other half in Jesus, in Hedwig, in whatever. And Stephen Trask and I, the composer and I, were hanging out and often working at this drag club called Squeezebox, which was a punk rock drag club, and he was the head of the house band, and my boyfriend was a bass player. So he's like, look, I can get you a gig with a guaranteed audience and a band for nothing here at Squeezebox, but you have to do this drag character. It's a drag club. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was very scared, as many young gay guys are, of their feminine side, because it's more acceptable to be a murderer than a woman in many corners.
Yes, I know.
And even women have trouble being women.
Yeah.
Because it's a man's fucking world. So I was always scared of drag, even though I have it in me. And I was forced into it. Like Hedwig forced into finding his femininity, you know, as Hansel. I was forced into it, and it was so liberating. I was so terrified, but with the rock and roll and the drag and doing Origin of Love for the first time, it felt like I'd come home. So that character shifted into the protagonist. So, and then Tommy receded to second banana. So it really was an accidental thing. But just my taste is, full-fledged, multi-dimensional characters, and that just happened to be the one that was ready to go.
So then transferring, one of the things that I thought was so interesting is once it transfers to Broadway and the revival, it becomes...
That was the first time I actually made money. Well, it was a flop in the theaters.
That's what was so interesting to me is that you did the play and then the movie, in a sense, created the phenomenon of
and DVD is really what brought it to the world.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And now we don't have that as much.
Which is another reason that independent film has these problems, because that used to be a natural way to get things around and gift it. And now it streams, which you can still find it, but who can get through, the Netflix? I think of the Flintstones when they're running through the house and you see the same table and chair over and over. When you go to Netflix, they seem to supposed to have millions of movies, but I keep seeing Russian Doll over and over.
Yeah, they do. They program.
Yeah, there's not easy to search.
No.
And
that's how I found one of your movies. In fact, I had to put in, so there's the key is put in the person's name, and then you get the movie, yes.
Well, they don't make it easy. And, when we got the rights back to my second film, Shortbus, even 10 years ago, Amazon, Netflix, and whoever was around would, license it. They don't want them anymore. They don't want the small films. They want them if they can put them up front and they have a name or something.
Right.
But they're not, it used to be, like they were like Blockbuster. Yeah. They'd take any film, and it was it was just a quantity game.
Yeah.
Now they want just their original material to be forefront, which they've been preparing for a while, knowing that Friends and The Office would be pulled off by their owners. Right. And so it's not, again, another blockade for small films. There's not, there's of course Criterion Channel and other places that are curated, but they don't have the same impact as those big streamers.
I think there's only the Criterion Channel, because there's no longer, yes, there's IFC and Bravo.
Fandor, isn't there a Fandor department of Amazon? I don't know. But you're right. It's not the small
store picks. I just always feel like, I made store picks once again.
No.
I don't know if that's so good, though.
It's weird.
And it's great.
My last film, which probably would have had more of an audience, 20 years ago, How to Talk to Girls kind of sank because it didn't fit into anything.
I know, which I got to watch on.
You did?
Yes, I got to watch on Netflix. You can see. We can talk. We're going to talk about that in both Rabbit Hole and working with Nicole Kidman. We both worked with. Of course, you've directed Nicole Kidman. But the last question I was going to ask is coming back for the Tony Award-winning revival and stepping away from the character and watching other people like Neil Patrick Harris come in. Does each person who come in follow your rules of Hedwig, or do they bring their own vulnerabilities? Because that's what I think the movie, the character has transcended and played all over the world, because each person says, this is going to be my vulnerabilities. You know, I read that it was in Korea.
Yeah, it's huge in Korea and Japan.
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, it translates. I think the love story translates so strong. Obviously, the songs are amazing. And I've seen a lot of people play. I don't really need to see everybody, but on Broadway, I would give them a day or two to talk through stuff. But there's a director, Michael Mayer, and the assistant director, Johanna, really making it happen. So I was just the writer. On Broadway, I was in charge of small things like animation and a fake program, because Hedwig's performing on the set of a show that just closed, which is the Hurt Locker musical. Right. Closed to intermission, weirdly, which has never happened before.
Like Moose Murders.
Yes. So I got to make a fake playbill for
that. That's great.
Which was hilariously that Mike Albo made. So what was the question? Yeah, so it's like I'm not a micromanager. I love people to do what they want. I think Hedwig can be played by anyone because it is a mask. Yeah. Any gender, any age, any ethnicity. There's been productions that have had 10 Hedwigs, one for each song. There's been double Hedwigs, the double half thing. There's been trans people. There's been women. To me, it's around long enough that the shock of a man playing, that's not the point of it.
Right.
The point of it is this character.
Right.
And again, a gender of one, someone who doesn't fit in any group, is trying to deal with the wound of the angry inch and make something of it. This is what I have to work with, she says. And everyone can relate to that, which is why the audience has always been very mixed. Yeah,
because they find whatever their vulnerability is, and they bring it out. So after all this success, so was the first movie you did Shortbus after?
Yes.
Now, that's the one I was unable to see. That was hard to find. You can buy it on Amazon.
You can buy the DVD on Amazon. It's gone. I
remember it created quite a stir. We were talking a little bit about it on set, but I think I was in Sundance.
We had an amazing
quite a stir.
Well, we did it we just premiered at Cannes, and it was the year before the economy collapsed. So we had this amazing party on the beach and a full concert, and Barry Diller and Diane von Furstenberg arriving in a boat, and it was just a massive thing. It was more accepted, I think, in Europe because they're a little less scared of the sex. Yeah, France, Spain, and Italy, and Germany just loved it. We changed the law in Korea because the distributor took it. It was banned, and the distributor took it to the Supreme Court of Korea. Wow, which I loved only because the Supreme Court had to watch Hedwig. I mean, Shortbus, which opens with a guy blowing himself. And I was like, the Chief Justice dissents. And they ruled for Hedwig, and for Shortbus, sorry. Probably because of Hedwig was so popular there, but they actually changed the law.
Wow.
And said that explicit things, if they were still, of artistic intent, could not be banned. And so that's...
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I ordered it on Amazon, but I didn't get it in time. It took longer,
yeah. Well, after Hedwig, I had and there was, Hedwig did very well critically and award-wise, but, it was still 2001, so we're not going to be nominated for an Oscar. It's just a little too weird, maybe today. But it was, it was a little too queer, too whatever.
But you were in the mix. I mean, I definitely remember.
Yeah, I mean, we won a lot of awards.
Yeah,
and we got
independent spirit.
Yeah, and we got
level.
a Golden Globe nomination, which is kind of like getting a nomination from the Addams Family. But they sometimes really get behind something odd, and then Bob Shea, Lord of the Rings was out too, which he'd put out. So I was going to all these Lord of the Rings parties, and it was such a trip. And I was mostly hanging out with the Y Tu Mama Tambien folks, because we were both the underground ones, and Alfonso Cuarón and Gael Garcia are still friendly with. But there was a sense, a lot of people wanted me to make would you like to make the movie of Rent? Would you like to make the movie of...
God, I'm surprised but you didn't.
I didn't.
You didn't want to do Hairspray or...
I didn't want to do something that I didn't have to do. Mm-hmm.
But didn't you ever think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but don't you ever think my sensibility needs to be in Hairspray? Because then that's what me as a viewer, sometimes certain movies you're like, okay, well that's that. Maybe if you brought in a more provocative person.
But I was spoiled by all these wonderful people, and not spoiled, but I was taught, if you're going to kill yourself to do something, let it be something you have to do, which I miss a bit of now. I miss that sense of like, I've got to do this story. Not that I've got to make a calling card for Hollywood, or I've got to, but actually this thing.
Yeah.
The Moonlights and the films that are just commercially untenable, but come from the purest place, and so they end up being beams of light that people are attracted to, and they don't fit into anything. And so, and I'm a little punk rock that way. I was like, I don't want to do something I don't care about. Also, I know the more money is involved, the more shit's involved.
Right.
People behave worse when there's more money around. Agents behave worse. Actors behave worse if they don't really want to be there, if it's a money job. Right? Getting them out of the trailer is harder.
Right.
I just see people become people they don't like when they're doing something just because it's famous, big, or money-making. You can do all of those things and make have a great script, but these things didn't do it for me. I wrote a children's film which was too crazy, and my other thesis was I want to make a film, Cassavetes style, or with a little Mike Lee thrown in, and creating something through improv with actors using sex as a language that was cinematic. I always wondered why, in the story of First Love, why would they cut to the candle on the first time they had sex? That's a vital part of the first relationship, the first time you have sex.
Right. That's
ridiculous and touching and hot, but it's not. Americans think sex must equal hot or erotic, when we all know that
now it does. My favorite love scene is from Coming Home. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
A vulnerability of that kills
and the
me.
Complexity and sex is just a place where you can, it's like a microcosm. You can, if you didn't know someone and watch them having sex, you would be you'd get to know them. So why take those paints out of the paint box? I never understood. I mean, I understood culturally why, but I was also very Catholic, so it scared me a little too. But I was inspired by films like Taxi Tum Clos and Genet's film Un Chant d'Amour and Fat Girl by Catherine Breillat. There was a lot of European films at that time in the late 90s that were using real sex. Brown Bunny, which wasn't my thing. But, he was trying something. But they also were all very grim. And I'm like, sex is more than just anomie and, and just self-hatred. So the sex is hilarious to me. It's also ridiculous. So that's where our kind of La Ronde, Nashville-y kind of thing, which is Shortbus.
The humor.
Yeah.
That's what I say. You always have humor except in the movie Rabbit Hole, which is a very sad. It's a very
Yeah,
sad.
there's a couple jokes.
So after doing Shortbus, how did Rabbit Hole come your way?
Well, that was interesting. It was my agent was working with another director who had to drop out and said, "Take a look at this." And I lost a brother at the same age as the character loses her son, and I just was really moved. I hadn't seen the play. Nicole Kidman was already starring and a co-producer, and I just was really moved. And I like. As actors, we like to do all kinds of things. You know, filmmakers and actors get that thing of like, well, it's not anything like your other thing. And you're like,
Right.
Yeah. And you don't know what to say to that because it's a lack of imagination. But I had a conversation with Nicole where I talked about how much it meant to me and what I would do and the tone. And that one phone conversation, she went on her instinct and hired me. And it was the first time I was a kind of hire, so I didn't really have final cut. And, there was some stress with another producer who was very nudgy. She had good taste, but it was like everything was second guessed. It was like trapped.
Yeah.
But I'm still proud of how it ended up. I think I would have taken a few more risks if I'd had the stylistic, if I had the final say. But Nicole was very much, just the actor when we were making it.
Right.
And she's such a powerhouse of self-direction that often it would be, and a director always has to see what people need. Aaron Eckhart needed jokes to kind of reduce his tension. Miles Teller, it was his first film.
Right.
And I was just trying to keep him relaxed and keyed in with surrounded by these stars, but he was incredibly self-sufficient, which was shocking for someone so young. And then they were friends in small roles, so you learn all what the actors need. You learn who does their coverage first, who does it second.
Yeah.
But Nicole is such a kind of powerhouse that often you're just trying to figure out how to stay out of her way on her journey. So I found that my favorite thing to say to her between takes was, "Do you need me right now?" And which really meant I had an idea.
Right.
But I didn't want to mess up her journey because she would be on a flow.
Right.
And she heard that and would go, "What do you think?" And then we had a great relationship. It was very, very symbiotic. We're both actors. You know what a bad direction is, which is mostly, don't do that. And a good direction, which is stay in that track, or metaphors are much better than.
I like when they ask you to do something and I go, "Are you not seeing it on the monitor? Because I am doing that."
Yeah, when they really meant to say, do it more, or.
I think they like it. They're looking at the monitor and they see something you did and they like it.
Yeah.
And they just need to trust that you're going to do it again.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. And directors get scared of actors.
Yeah.
Because actors also, if they smell a weak director, do you know what I mean? There is a sense of like, oh, really?
Betty Davis. Go all Betty Davis on them.
Yeah. But to me, being an actor and knowing what people just want to feel safe.
So what do you
and
do?
Loved and like, give me an idea.
So what do you demand of yourself as an actor, and what do you demand of yourself as a director? Are they the same, or are they different?
Sometimes the actor thing is harder because I find that I'm often best when I'm caring less, not to do the work, but to, oh my God, reminding yourself that the editor, there's bits and pieces of all these takes that are completely useful.
Right.
And not get into the theater mode of like, that take, the first half was terrible.
Right.
It's like, no, the second half was great.
Right.
Because they can cut them together.
Right.
If you're on stage, it's a different thing, and you do have to get it all together. But trust that the director knows that he's got it. You can tell when the director hasn't, the sweat. And sometimes you have to step in and say, okay, you gave me this, but I'm thinking that maybe that direction, you know, rather than giving the speech as an entreaty, maybe it should be as a gift. Does that seem like a good thing? And then they're like, yeah, because they haven't mastered the way of talking about it. And an actor sometimes, because there's so little time, has to make snap decisions and let the director know that, how about this? You know, like help the director get off the hook.
Right.
It's usually supposed to be the other way around.
I think I would imagine, again, when you're doing an emotionally charged film like that the hardest thing to do is, like you said, you have a producer who's nudging you and you're up against the clock and it's almost lunch and you know you don't have the scene. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, and
like,
it's a scary thing.
I gotta go on and I don't have it, or I gotta...
Yeah, it is a scary thing, and a good director will ask and will know. You know, you don't start with a film with the scene where they're breaking down. If you have to, you do it later in the day, not after lunch. Right?
Definitely
do
not
it
after
at 4
lunch.
p.m.
Yeah.
So there's tricks that you know. There's also, like I said, knowing who to start the coverage on.
Yes.
In the scene, some people are really good with their first takes.
I'm so in sync with you.
Yeah, there's so many tricks like that. There's also knowing when to let them improvise. And sometimes the improv is actually better, and sometimes it just gets them out of their head.
Right.
You do the improv, then you do another take, you go back to the lines. So there are little things that actors have all seen and welcome, and they don't want to be a director to be afraid of them because they're uncontrollable. They want to be there, and they just want to be loved. A joke reduces tension massively. A director on set making a joke at the right time reduces a lot of tension. It's being a host at a party, you know, and everyone is very important, from the caterers to the you know the stars, and you got to make everyone feel welcome. And that is a specialty to me. And I also remind the actors, the end product of the film, that's not your life. Making the film is your life.
Very much. And
that has to be a good experience. It just has to be. And that also takes the pressure off. You know, the end result, you know, actors playing results, you know, is the worst thing. It's like you're not in it anymore. You know, you're at the end of it.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways to reduce tension and find, for myself as an actor too, and not caring is a great one.
Changing lenses.
Yeah. Also lying to actors.
Especially with emotional scenes.
We got that. But the sound, the mic went out. And you can even lie. Because they're like, damn. And you're just like, so they don't feel... Usually what you wanted to say was, that wasn't it.
Yes.
But that, you should never say, that wasn't it. You should never say, don't do this. We had a director on Shrill who every note was a don't note. Don't raise your voice. Don't move your hands. What are you going to do? But think about your hands the whole take. It's the worst thing.
Like a T-Rex.
Never do a don't. Always focus on the thing that is working. Go more in that direction.
Right.
And I don't mind to surprise me. I don't mind that this one's for you.
Right.
You know, I really don't mind those. They're a little overdone, but we know what it means.
I like little dialing things. Something that you're doing or...
Love what you're doing, but dial it in. Don't let the person know you're doing it. You know.
Yeah.
Remember that you still... But the key thing of the acting class thing is still the most important. What do you want? Right, what do you want to do in this scene?
What about what I was talking about at the top of the show? You know, you're working with an actor that you really respect. You know him. You've met him socially. And suddenly you're in the scene and it's like...
Making out sometimes.
Are you going to do it that way?
Yeah. Well, I have had actors do that.
What is that performance?
Say that.
Okay.
Say that about another actor in the scene within earshot.
Oh, no. You can't do that.
It's
you just have to
happened.
make, as my teacher would say, making an adjustment. You're making a dramatic adjustment. You just have to.
Yeah.
I walk away and I just try to like it's when it's the performance from outer space that's really, really big. I'm always like I have to, because my eyes are so big that I have to make sure that I'm not like, are you going to do it?
Right. How big is the frame?
That's best. That's believe me, I do that too. Like, sorry. Because if
Thought
I
this was a close up.
I'm sorry. Oh, I hit my straw. I'm sorry. So that I can regroup and go, you need to make an adjustment because the person's going to do it in a really outlandish way like that. So you're going to have to make an adjustment that maybe he's deaf. And that's why he's talking. No, I have to step away and come up with something. Otherwise.
And knowing when to rehearse, certain things you do want to rehearse, certain things you don't. You don't want to rehearse a crying scene. You don't want to rehearse special explosive scenes, but you do want to talk about them, and you want to, when it's character-based stuff or relationship-based stuff, improvs, backstory improvs. You don't have much time, so how do you be a husband and wife right away?
Right.
Those things I think are useful. Getting to know the actor. I mean, some people don't like it, but sometimes I have brought up emotional events from actors' lives and say, when that happened, I wonder if you might want to keep that in mind for this take.
I think that's
Yeah.
terrific. Do you ever show them films maybe to look at? I do
For
that.
Shortbus, we did a full, watched a bunch of movies and had a month of improv and just watching stuff. And Woman Under the Influence and
I think that's great to get a tone.
yeah. And realize what people have done.
Right.
And the kind of freedom they can have.
It's funny that you mentioned Sunday Bloody Sunday because I actually thought the tone of Rabbit Hole reminded me of some of those English films like The Pumpkin Eater and that
Collector.
Yeah, that
Yeah. I mean this
stillness.
Yeah. It's I didn't really think about a film for that. I just, the script was strong, so it was more about. I knew we didn't have much time, so I wanted to, rather than do more shots and fancy shots, I just wanted more takes of the shots I already had. So the actors, we had much more to work with rather than another beautiful overhead that would take up half the day. I'd rather have Nicole have another 3 emotional takes than a beautiful shot. So it's not visually, stunning or anything.
Well, there is a nice lack of color in the film that is profound.
Yeah.
Because the color, their lives.
In her life, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that stands out.
Yeah.
What choices did you make to separate it from the play? Like, how did you...
Well, it was already written by the playwright, adapted by the playwright.
But just to... It's a big choice to take a play and make it into a film. It's a different medium. So did you make any conscious choices? This is something I can do because it's a film versus this is something I can do because it's a play, that kind of approach.
Well, we had this character who was a comic book artist. So, the producer and I really thought about it, his drawing being a kind of interstitial breathing thing because he eventually draws a comic book about parallel universes and how you can... As Nicole said, maybe in another universe I'm very happy. It's nice to think about. But it was already so strong, the script. I didn't need to do much else. But keep it realistic, keep the actors comfortable, and make our days. And so it was super actor-based. It was nerve-wracking not to have the final say, because I always felt like I had someone over my shoulder. Well, here's a funny story. I've already told the parties. By the way, my brother's here to pick me up soon. I wouldn't call this a tutorial, but this is what happened, and it was good. We premiered it at TIFF, Toronto, and...
Somebody coming in?
Something in.
Oh. Something is being snuck in. Okay. Yes.
Oh. We premiered at Toronto, and it was a very good reception. And there were very few suitors that we wanted or who were right for the film in terms of distribution. and there was Weinstein's, who I vowed. Once I heard him screaming, I thought it was a Pedro Almodovar, though he doesn't remember it. When I saw Harvey screaming at Pedro Almodovar, and all the other stories of people's, I didn't know about the sexual stuff, but I knew about him destroying people's films. I vowed I would rather not have the film come out than have him distribute something that I did, unless it had every protection in the world. But I saw Todd Haynes have Final Cut and stuff, and then he would dump Velvet Goldmine.
Right.
Harvey would kill it. So I vowed never to work with them. The only other person was Lionsgate. And I had one day off in the festival, and they wanted me to DJ at a queer night. And I was with friends, and someone had some ecstasy. And I was like, oh. I was really tense. And she's like, you're DJing tonight. It's your night out. So I had, she gave me an ecstasy pill, which is not a regular thing for me. And it was making me nervous. I was like, oh, God, it's going to be bad ecstasy. Everyone's nerve-wracking, paranoid feelings. Then I looked down at my phone. I had 12 messages. The Lionsgate meeting is now. I was like, but I thought you said it was. It's now. I can't. What do you mean you can't? I'm drunk. I'm like, I've got some coffee, and you get over to the hotel now. So everyone else was rolling now, and you can do this. There was lots of hugging, good long hug. Got in the cab, long conversation with the cabbie who was from Somalia and brought his kids over to survive the war, and I was crying, and then I realized when I got there, I was fully rolling, and my producers were there, and I was like, let's do this. And they were looking at me like, he's not drunk, but and I took over the producer. The director's not supposed to lead. It's supposed to be the producer.
Yeah.
I was, sat them all down and said, they were like, Oscar campaign, we're so moved, minimum guarantee. I was like, let's not talk about money. The producers are staring at me. I'd like to know what each of the 10 of you felt when you saw this film. And they were like, well, I remembered my mom. Everyone was crying, and the producers all like, and the hugs. The Somali cab driver came in. My friends with the ecstasy, and it was the next day we had this amazing offer, and it was the only people we wanted.
Yeah,
and I didn't tell them what was going on till many years later, and they all laughed. Nicole laughed too. But it was like, if you actually are nervous about negotiation, clean MDMA.
Right. Well, there's the point, at a certain point, my old acting teacher, Sanford Meisner, used to say the best performances sometimes were when you didn't want to go up for class because you were sick. You're like, there's a point of no return where you don't care. It's out of
you just
your control.
have to do it.
Yeah.
And you forget the nerves.
You're shooting in the middle of the night and things like that. All right, we're running out of time. So the last couple things I want to mention is, of course, the movie, How to Talk to Girls at Parties, and your podcast, the new podcast. So it's up to you, whatever you want to talk about.
We're doing a new promotional push, so I'll talk about that.
Okay.
Brian Weller and I made a musical that we thought should be a TV series. It was too weird for the powers that be. As if we brought Hedwig, to Netflix now, there still would also be like, what? It doesn't fit into our genre thing. So I understood that. So a company called Topic, which is amazing, who worked on films like Spotlight and Leave No Trace and Missing Richard Simmons podcast, financed a very ambitious 5.5-hour, 10-episode musical that, Glenn Close plays my mom. It's very autobiographical. Patti LuPone plays my aunt. Dennis O'Hare, Cynthia Erivo, Marion Cotillard is my doctor. So it was so fun to make something on a lower budget, though an expensive podcast budget, in a way that was very doable. You could fix stuff by having, Glenn Close yell into her iPhone with a towel over her head in Wisconsin and just email me the line and I drop it in. It was like people do that for temp edits, but not for the final. So this really worked for us. And Luminary, which is a kind of the Netflix of podcasts. They have a subscription service. Was so into it, and they have it on their app, so you can get it on the Luminary app. They have a 1 month free, that you can check things out. But I'm really proud of it, and we have very strong path to taking it to Broadway, and it was a perfect experience, and I was like to try something new. It was rock and roll. I just recorded some songs in Portland for a benefit album for my mom podcast. I'm sure I'll be writing novels. It's like, to me, I don't get panicked by the small film debacle of the moment, because there are so many ways to tell stories that I love. Working on developing a TV show now, and producing my brother's fictional podcast with Ed Asner, which we're financing now, called The Laundronauts. It's like for kids and adults.
That's funny. I mentioned that at the top. He's like 90. How old?
He's almost 90. He's awesome. I did a film with him in the 80s. Great guy.
I know. It's a lot of fun. Well, and I listened to it while I was up in Portland, so that was kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to the set. Well, JC, may I call you JCM?
You may.
Like
at the end of the
at the very end, or the very beginning.
Yeah.
Because I look forward to working more with you.
Yes.
Thanks so much for doing the show. It's awesome. All right. Well, as we end our podcast, as I always say, everyone's life is like a movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is the end of our show. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
It's always a sequel, though.
That's right.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of its owners or principals.